probably supplying live export for the best part of sort of 8 years. We wouldn't castrate, so we only bred entire cattle. And at the time, we were, or for the most part, we were receiving a sort of 20 to 30 cent premium over the market. The message we sort of received from importers was that they were chasing that really lean product, and that sort of more or less straight Brahman bulls were the preferred breed once they got over there, because they yielded really well, they were extremely lean, and their weight gains were significant when they're in a feedlot environment. So I think going into this trip, I had that in the back of my mind. I was sort of, not expecting to see really anything with marbling. And so to get in there and see a lot of Wagyu sort of through the supermarkets, to see evidence of a lot of crossbred and composite cattle being killed, sort of straight away sort of changed my tone. It made me really challenge that sort of paradigm I was stuck in, I suppose, in terms of who I thought our customer was over there. So I may be preaching to the converted. I'm not preaching to the converted, but I might be telling you nothing new here for those who are on this session, but maybe for the recording it might be of some benefit. So obviously the northern beef herd is significant. Majority of Australia's cattle are in sort of northern Australia, but a lot of them are through Queensland and still supply the domestic market and a higher value market than the Northern Territory. You can see there that the Territory is only sort of 8% of the Australian cattle population, and we're sort of supplying 90% of the live export trade. So again, I thought that we were a really big player when it comes to exporting cattle to Indonesia, but our live exports only account for, I think it's 16.4 or 16.6% of Indonesia's total beef consumption. So again, this is where, being in market, and as Harriet sort of said at the end there, it's just so vital for us to know who our customer is and who we're supplying to, because I think we sort of get distracted by what we're doing inside Australia. So that was sort of what I was coming into the trip thinking and sort of having an understanding of. Again, I think I probably underestimated the opportunity that exists in Indonesia just from the scale point of view. Obviously, there's a huge amount of people living over there, 280 million people, and a really rapidly growing economy. But I really did believe that they were sort of eating more beef than what they are. You can see there it's only sort of around 2 kilos per capita, and that's sort of in, generally speaking, sort of 2 or 3 sittings per year. So I was thinking, we can ramp up live export in Northern Australia, and we can keep pumping beef into these guys. But it sort of comes back to an affordability point of view. While their economy is expanding, last year we sort of heard that there was actually sort of a decrease in the middle class. So it'd been sort of the middle class had been growing and then actually constricted sort of last year. So it is still a really challenging environment. I think the exciting thing from a northern beef producer perspective is that where you've got a declining and aging population occurring in Japan, the population in Indonesia is still expanding. You've got this middle class that is still growing, with a lot of young people entering that middle class. Is probably the biggest opportunity I see, and they're people that are coming in wanting to eat high quality beef.
Hey, Hugh, I might just get you to hit present on your slides again. Sorry, mate.
Oh yeah, how do you do that? Is that this one?
Yeah, that's the one.
River. I can't actually see anything. So probably, yeah, I was really interested when started looking into the numbers of what our trade to Indonesia, how it's represented. So you'll see there that, this was last year. We supplied Indonesia with $609 million of box beef and 535, just over $535 million of live cattle. So a total value of sort of near enough to $1.15 billion. So in 2018, that value was around 1.8 billion of combined exports. There was probably a little bit more live in there, the percentage wise versus boxed, but the total value was 1.8 billion. So I was really interested to see, what's the present value of that 1.8 billion dollars in 2018 in today's money. So you can see
I
there.
don't think you're on the right presentation. I think that's a good slide to actually show. Just go down the bottom and there's a little presenter button.
Yeah. No, I'm getting nothing. Is that working or nothing?
Not really. Your slides aren't moving along.
Hugh, we're only seeing slide 3 at the moment. That's where we're at.
I'll end my show and I'll start again.
Yeah, go to that button. Yep.
That's right.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's what we want to see.
Just keep on to me if I'll tell you when I'm changing slides,
Okay.
so I can get me out of trouble. So yeah, I was really interested to see. I think in Australia we talk about trying to export value, not necessarily volume. So I wanted to work out that present value of $1.8 billion in 2018. So you can see there the present value of that capital is 2.14 billion. So you can pretty quickly work out that's only the 1.145 billion is only 53.5% of that value. So we've seen a negative near enough to 50% decline in the real value of the export market to Indonesia. And you sort of go, right, well, is that because we're not exporting as much? And you can see there that graph from episode 3, there's been a little dip there sort of around COVID, but we're still exporting significant volume to Indonesia, but the value of it's sort of been in a real decline of almost 9% per annum. So in real terms. So I just thought that was a really interesting little number or a few numbers there to look at. And again, probably challenge what I thought of the Indonesian market. Does that slide change or is it still stuck?
No, it's still stuck.
Holy hell.
Might just click through on one side.
So you can see there the value of Indonesian exports have been declining. There have been a few impacts around sort of policy, COVID, foot and mouth in Indonesia, had them killing a lot of their own herd. I suppose another interesting observation around that is that our exports of boxed beef have sort of been increasing, and there's been a more significant decline in live exports. So you're seeing that translate to a growing supermarket industry, I guess. But we heard a lot that consumers, for the most part, still prefer to go and source their beef from wet markets, and that number's roughly 90% of people are still sourcing beef from wet markets, which is massive. Sort of touched on that there. Indonesian people aren't eating a lot of beef. It's usually around sort of festive occasions. And then one of the big sort of factors that the Australian beef industry has experienced in the Indonesian market is just the importing of Indian buffalo meat. So it's coming in at a very cost competitive position. and it's taking away a lot from Australian box meat. There's also been evidence of it sort of slipping into wet markets, and while we heard that people can sort of pick it in a wet market compared to your fresh beef, people are still buying it just because it's cheap. One of the really interesting things about the Indonesian market as well, I don't want to sort of rabbit on too much about the Indonesian market, but I think what's going to be a huge challenge for us is the price ceiling that exists in wet markets. So it's actually a government mandate that retailers cannot sell, and I don't have the figure in front of me, but they can't sell their beef for more than, can anyone remember that number off the top of their head?
Yeah, it's 120 to 130,000.
Yeah. And that's
which is like 11 or 12 Australian dollars.
Yeah. So I think, and that number hasn't really shifted. So again, the sort of growth potential there and the capacity for, value to marry up with volume is restricted. And I think for us to really keep cracking along and making headway into the Indonesian market, something's got to change there, because our cost of productions are increasing. And it's just not going to be viable for us to keep targeting the Indonesian market if we can't get remunerated for it in a way that works for us and it works for the importers. We saw just after COVID, when imports started opening up again, importers were really being squeezed because they were having to pay huge premiums for Australian cattle as we sort of went into a herd rebuild. And I think in the north now we're still sort of feeling the consequences of that. There's a huge pushback to any increase in price for us, and for those guys targeting the live export market, it's becoming really challenging. And I suppose that's where your supermarket retail probably represents a bit more of an opportunity, especially to get more of your composite breeds into that area. But it's it's only sort of 10% of the where consumers are going. So probably still needs to mature, but I think that's probably where the opportunity is for the north going forward, more so than live export. We'll just touch on that Melteek beef. I think that's a massive opportunity. I don't know if Kat or Harry, you guys have talked about that, but we saw beef from Brahman cows being injected with Wagyu fat and then being sold at a premium. I went on Tokopedia, which is an Indonesian e-commerce site, and found that this Melteek beef, which is basically just this bits of meat glued together, injected with this Wagyu tallow, and that was retailing for more than an imported Australian sirloin on this Tokopedia page. So it's crazy to think that they were Brahman cows that have been killed in Warrnambool and then exported to Indonesia, getting injected with Wagyu tallow and then being sold at a premium. Again, just completely shifted this paradigm I had where all Indonesian consumers wanted is a really lean beef product, and started making me think maybe there's more opportunities sort of elsewhere. But I'll move on because I'm probably rambling with my highly technical slide shifting technique. Singapore, I think going from, it'd probably be almost better to talk about Singapore last, but I think going into Singapore, knowing it's a high value consumer market, knowing that they're seeking products that are not readily available, to see that there was a microbrewery, the tallest microbrewery in the world, was value adding Wagyu, so an already high value product, to me was just crazy to think about when you're supplying Brahmans for bakso balls and what doesn't go over there sort of ends up in grinding beef for hamburgers. So I think the opportunities in Singapore more so around experiential value. We saw what AACO are doing with their Wagyu, and I think you can, if you can if you can share your story and have really strong messaging around your product, that's probably where you'll realize value or sort of be able to access value rather. And obviously the proximity to Singapore is favorable for Australia. But yeah, I think I'll talk about this a bit further as we go on. It'll be a really challenging market, I think, for Northern Australia. I'm probably talking, more the Territory than Queensland to really crack into, just because of how competitive it is. I think there's huge opportunities in Japan to start exporting, and if that happens, that could also take away from what we can do in Singapore. But yeah, I'll keep going on and might come back to Singapore a bit later. So, yeah, for me, going into Japan, I didn't really know what to expect, to be honest, other than, this huge consumer demand for really highly marbled products. I also, had this perception it's a really wealthy consumer market, high discretionary spending, high disposable income, and consumers that really want to target, a premium, healthy product. You can see they're obviously a significant trading partner for Australia. Almost 20% of what Japan imports comes from us. So, yeah, strong opportunities there as far as relationships. But yeah, as that sort of first point, really came away from Japan with more questions than answers, I think. I think the first one, and it sort of goes to that, a consumer market that talks the talk but stumbles a bit when it comes to walking the walk. From the outside looking in, I thought of Japan as this, like I said, really premium market targeting really healthy products, not sort of eating much processed food. But when you get there is a huge amount of processed food. And we actually...
And pudding.
And put a lot of processed everything, really. So I've got a stat here and I can't find it. It was just there. But yeah, Australia accounts for 90.6% of Japan's sugar import, which is 1.1 million metric tons. And this is a figure. Why I want to talk about this point? This is a figure that's not readily available. So the Japanese government don't release this figure around sugar. We only got this from the embassy. So I think again, it makes you start questioning, righto, well, is this market really what we think it is from the outside looking in? And it's not until you get inside it that I think actually maybe the demand for, your really clean, green, sort of nutritious product isn't as strong as maybe ultra processed stuff that's at a competitive price point. So I sort of started to wonder a bit, why is that the case? Why is the average Japanese consumer not really living up to this sort of, I suppose, stereotype, if you like? So if you start to look at some sort of statistics around the Japanese economy, Harriet touched on there being negative wage growth. That's been for the past 30 years. So they haven't increased wages for the past 30 years. But, on the other side of the coin, your energy costs have gone through the roof. You can see there that the energy supply was reduced by, almost 40% in just over 20 years. So, and then you got the household debt sort of increasing. So that became inverted with income last year. Interest rates are going up. So, while their interest rates are still low relative to the rest of the world, you know, a 0.5% increase in interest rates for people who have not a very good capacity to cover their interest is huge. You know, their population is aging, their population is declining, and their unemployment rate is going up because you've got these people who are getting older who can't work. And one of the biggest takeaways, I think, was when we met James Strawn from the Australian Embassy, and he talks about he talks about the Japanese economy being the Japanese population or society being a low context society. So for the most part, they don't question anything. They sort of assume that everyone's on the same page and everyone's getting along. But we had a conversation about this when we were over there. It's like they're sort of politely walking towards the edge of a cliff, and no one's really saying maybe we should do something about this. Maybe we should turn the corner and stop this. But yeah, so I think probably for us exporting to Japan, it's alarming in the sense that while I think there are opportunities for low value cuts, it's probably not going to be a growing market for anything that sort of does hit that premium range, unless you can position it under the sort of Japanese Wagyu that's sort of already in demand. And that's where I think, you know, I probably put it a few slides too early, but in my eyes, I reckon there's a huge opportunity for something that's in that 95 CL bracket. You know, you could be sending a lot of box beef out of Northern Australia or your old Brahman cows and have them in grinding beef that they're using in their sort of ready-made supermarket meals. There's that many 7-Elevens and Lawsons getting around with, you wouldn't really know what you're eating, but they say it's beef. So I think there could be an opportunity to target that. And again, probably the anecdotal evidence we saw was that for the most part, people want to eat beef. They really want to eat beef, but they don't want to pay for it. So they can't really afford it. So I think if we're cost competitive, then there is actually an opportunity in Japan for maybe, you know, lower value carcasses than trying to, you know, send anything of quality over there because of how competitive it is for quality already. So I think my overall sort of takeaways, again, through the lens of a northern beef producer, you know, we do have strong global brand recognition. We can leverage that, but I don't think we can sort of rest on our laurels and think that that's the reason we have access to a market and can sell into a market. I still think we need to be working really hard to show that we can bring a higher value product to a market. And when I say value, I don't necessarily mean a higher price. I actually think that, you know, if we really need to be focusing on where we can be cost competitive, because we're competing with a lot of other countries for the same sort of stake, I think. So yeah, again, you know, low marble beef is sought after, not necessarily as a steak, but it's people are eating it in some form or another. So if we can slip in there, I think there is upside for commodity beef in a market like Japan, and obviously the Indonesian market. If we can look at trying to, I think, help where we can get this supermarket sort of retail side up and going, or it is up and going, but, you know, really cracking along. That'd be an area to sort of invest in. Again, touched on it, you know, consumers everywhere we went love beef. which is hugely positive for us. But it's just a really, really tight consumer market. Like Harriet said, sort of closing out there as well. That was probably the thing that I really, really rattled me, I think, coming away from that trip, especially being in Japan, where I sort of thought that they had it all together, to then work out, oh, actually, no, they're sort of pretending to have it together. It made me just think that we need to be doing more to try and control our costs where we can. And that really leads into where I think your on-farm management decisions need to be centered around. If we can keep our cost of production down and still be able to, achieve margins, it'll put us in a position where we're able to sort of be a bit more dynamic, react to these sort of economic uncertainties in Asia, I think, across the board. We just need a bit of breathing room, I think, and controlling cost of production is going to be critical to that, because we can't rely on what our sale price will be tomorrow or the next day. And I think a big part of that for me is, trying to keep things simple. So investing in breeds that are suited to land type. There's a lot of Wagyu getting around in the territory now. I haven't had enough to do with it personally. It seems to be working from a breeding perspective, but I think focusing on breeds that are suited to our land type, so that we're not having to spend more than we need to get a calf on the ground and to get that calf, on a truck and gone off the place with money in our pocket is going to be really critical, I think, for the Australian beef industry in Northern Australia, moving forward for the next sort of 10 to 20 years, in my eyes. And I think that just really sums it up there. Like, demand for all grades of beef is strong when the price is right. I think to get our price right, we've got to be clinical on cost of production, and just make management decisions on farm or through our supply chain that are really conscious of that. So, that's probably my skirt. Again, thank you so much to the ICMJ for making this trip possible. Like I said, I've been working up here for several years now. I thought I knew a bit about our export market into Southeast Asia, and this just revealed how much there is to know, and how little I probably do know, and certainly ignited a passion to get into more of our markets, to get a better understanding of what's actually going on. And I think, ultimately they're going to be the experiences that come back and make it possible to make good management decisions, where our supply chain starts, more or less. So, thank you so much to AMPC and MLA for sponsoring. And I know I'm probably just parroting what Hat said, but I couldn't recommend this experience highly enough to anyone thinking about it. It'll blow your mind. Absolutely one of the best trips I've done. So.